Alex, is the Job Guide 360 interview guide worth it?
Honestly, yes, the guide is highly insightful. I recommend it to everyone.
Okay, let's unpack this. We were given a fascinating look behind the curtain recently, this definitive list. The exact interview questions used to vet top-tier growth hackers.
Yeah, it's really something. And it's much more than just, an HR document.
Right.
It's essentially a blueprint. It gives you this X-ray view of how expert knowledge workers are expected to define, execute, and, importantly, troubleshoot growth, especially in these lean startup environments.
And what struck me is how it reveals this big shift. It feels less about finding one-off hacks anymore.
Totally. The emphasis now is squarely on disciplined, scalable, data-driven systems. That's what comes through loud and clear.
So our mission today is to take these, frankly, incredibly high expectations and synthesize them. Turn them into a clear, actionable playbook for you listening.
Exactly. Whether you're actually prepping for a growth role or maybe you just want to bring that kind of strategic rigor into your own work, this is like the structural roadmap.
We've broken down the insights from these questions into 4 main areas, right?
Yeah, 4 critical pillars. First step is foundational metrics and the underlying strategy. Then second, the kind of rigor you need in experimentation. Third, how to do rapid crisis diagnosis. And finally, that scrappy playbook, how to operate when you're in a really lean environment.
Okay, let's start right at the top then. Foundational strategy. How do the best thinkers, according to these questions, define growth, pushing beyond just, more signups this week?
Well, the consistent theme is defining growth as moving the business's core North Star metric, and crucially, doing that by creating compounding loops across the entire user journey.
The entire journey, so not just acquisition.
Right. It has to connect acquisition, activation, retention, and monetization. That end-to-end view. It seems completely non-negotiable at this level.
Okay, so defining that North Star metric itself, that sounds tricky. How do they ensure it's not just, a vanity metric, something that looks good but doesn't drive the business?
That's a huge focus. The North Star must reflect actual delivered value. Consistently, you see examples like weekly active teams completing a core action, not just something passive like daily logins.
Yeah.
And picking the metric is just the start. The next step, immediately, is designing a KPI tree. You map out all the inputs, acquisition rates, activation, time to value, retention metrics.
Mapping it all out.
Yeah, and crucially, setting guardrails. They explicitly ask how you'd prevent the metric from being gamed, optimized in a way that actually harms long-term customer health or the business itself.
So it's about making sure the whole system, the whole business is really running in the right direction. And tracking that direction, especially the long-term health part, the consensus in these documents points heavily towards one specific tool.
Oh yeah, cohort analysis. It came up again and again. It seems to be the single most important analytical tool for separating real compounding growth from, say, temporary spikes or just novelty effects.
Explain that a bit more. How does cohort analysis do that?
Well, by grouping users based on when they join, like everyone who signed up in January is one cohort, February another, and then tracking their behavior over time, say weeks or months, you get this really reliable picture of the retention patterns, their lifetime value. You see if things are actually improving long-term or just temporarily.
So if strategy is the map, cohort analysis is kind of like the compass, making sure you're not confusing a short-term sugar rush with actual sustainable progress.
That's a great way to put it. It keeps you honest about long-term health.
Was there a specific example in the materials of cohort analysis driving a decision?
Yes, a really good one. They described a case using cohorts where they discovered users who completed 2 specific projects within their first week. Well, they retained 2.3 times better than users who only completed 1 or none.
Wow, 2.3x, that's significant.
Huge insight, right. And they didn't just, report the number and move on. The expectation was immediate action. They used that insight to drive an onboarding redesign.
And the result?
The redesign specifically lifted day 90 retention by a measurable 11%. So it directly moved the North Star metric, but only because they understood the why behind that cohort's behavior. It wasn't just correlation.
Okay, that makes sense. That brings us neatly into the engine room. Execution and experimentation. Now, a central tension that came up in these interview questions was balancing that need to ship features fast with the demand for real statistical rigor. How do top growth hackers run experiments quickly without, shooting themselves in the foot with bad data?
Right, that's the tightrope walk. The foundational structure they seem to rely on is the HMO framework. hypothesis, metric, outcome. Simple, but it forces discipline.
HMO. Okay.
But the real key is when they apply the rigor. It's not an afterthought. They apply statistical methods before the experiment even launches.
Before. How does that work?
Yes, before. Things like running a power analysis. This tells them how large their sample size needs to be to actually detect a meaningful effect. They also pre-register their primary metrics, what exactly are they measuring, and the minimum detectable effect, the MDE.
MDE. So that's like the smallest change they care about.
Exactly. It answers the question, what's the minimum lift we actually need to see to confidently say this test was a success and wasn't just random noise?
But wait a minute. Running power analysis, figuring out MDE, that takes time, right? If you're a scrappy startup, doesn't that rigor actually slow down your velocity? How do they justify spending time on that up front?
That is the critical challenge, and it came up implicitly. They justify it because it prevents much larger wastes of time and resources down the line. Running underpowered tests or misinterpreting noise as signal is incredibly costly.
Okay, so it's an investment.
Precisely. And another key tactic is setting fixed horizons for test duration. They'll decide up front, this test runs for 2 full business cycles, or maybe 2 full weeks, regardless of what the dashboard seems to show on day 5.
Why is that so important? Why not stop it early if it looks like a winner?
Because that's called peaking, and it's a major statistical pitfall. Early results can be heavily influenced by randomness. Stopping early often leads you to declare winners that aren't real, or miss effects that emerge over time. Fixing the window actually saves time and resources in the long run because you avoid having to rerun experiments that were stopped prematurely based on noise.
Okay. That makes perfect sense now. Rigor isn't the enemy of speed. It's actually a mechanism for sustainable speed over the long term. All right, so let's say you've got this rigorous process, but your backlog has like 100 experiment ideas and the team is just 3 people. How do they prioritize? How do they choose what to actually do next?
Good question. They typically use a lightweight RICE model. That stands for reach, impact, confidence, and effort. It's a scoring system to help rank ideas.
RICE. Reach, impact, confidence, effort.
Right. But the deeper operating principle described is really about managing capacity strategically. The successful candidates talked about reserving maybe 70% of their team's capacity for high-scoring quick wins. These build momentum, show results, and build credibility across the org.
Okay, 70% for the quick wins.
And then dedicating the remaining 30% to bigger strategic bets. These are the experiments that might truly unlock new growth loops or step change improvements, even if they take more effort or have less certainty up front.
And that confidence score in RICE,
Yeah.
how important is that?
It's critical, and it's heavily weighted towards evidence. As multiple sources implied, evidence beats opinion. A gut feeling gets a low confidence score. An idea backed by user research or prior data gets a much higher one.
Got it. And when they deploy that 30% strategic capacity, they're not just looking for, say, a one-off marketing campaign.
No, exactly. They're focused on designing those self-reinforcing systems, the growth loops we mentioned earlier, things that scale themselves over time.
Can you give an example of a loop like that from the materials?
Yeah, there was an excellent one about a freemium software tool. They wanted to build a referral loop. Instead of just slapping a refer a friend button somewhere, they optimized it. They triggered a specific incentive, unlock pro features for a week, but only after a user hit a key success milestone within the product itself. That moment when the user feels successful is a high leverage point to ask for something.
Ah, smart. Timing matters.
Hugely. And this engineered incentive tied to value resulted in their K factor, that's the virality coefficient, stabilizing at a consistent 0.34.
Okay, K-factor 0.34. For listeners who maybe don't track K-factor daily, what does that actually mean in practical terms?
It means that for every 100 new users they acquired through other means, this referral loop consistently generated an additional 34 new users, essentially for free. It became a predictable asset.
Wow.
In the specific case, it accounted for something like 18% to 22% of all their new user acquisition, reliably, without ongoing ad spend on those referred users. That's the fundamental difference between a one-off campaign and a sustainable growth loop.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The crisis scenarios. These hypotheticals really test the candidate's thinking on their feet. Let's tackle the activation leak first. Scenario. Signups are suddenly up 40%, which sounds great, but activation, meaning users actually doing the core thing your product is for, has dropped 15%. You've got a huge new hole in the bucket. What's the immediate structured response expected?
Right, this is a classic. The expected response is immediate, structured, and time-boxed. Usually a 2-week diagnostic and initial fix plan. Week 1 is purely diagnostic.
Okay, week 1, diagnose. What does that involve?
First step, always. Validate the tracking. Never trust the data blindly, especially when it looks weird. Is the drop real or is an event misfiring?
Good point. Don't chase ghosts.
Exactly. Then segment ruthlessly. Where did this new influx of signups come from? Which marketing source? What device are they using? Which signup cohort is showing the biggest drop? You have to isolate the problem area.
Segmenting. So source, device, cohort.
Yep. You also immediately look for any correlated changes. Did a new product feature launch? Did marketing change targeting? You create diffs what changed right before the drop started. Alongside that quantitative slicing, you need qualitative insight. So replaying user sessions of people who drop off is crucial. See the struggle firsthand.
And one more thing for week 1.
Yes, a critical, fast tactic. Launch a 1-question post-sign-up survey. Something super simple like, what stopped you from completing core action today? You need to capture that user-stated friction immediately.
Okay, so week 1 is all about isolating where the leak is and why the product experience might be failing this new wave of users. What happens in week 2?
Week 2 shifts to action, but focused on quick, tactical fixes based on the week 1 diagnosis. The idea is to ship small improvements rapidly, usually behind feature flags so you can control the rollout.
Like what kind of fixes?
Things like clarifying empty states if users seem confused, maybe reducing the number of fields in a form if that's a friction point, adding progress indicators if the setup feels long. Small stuff, high impact.
Makes sense.
They might also trigger a targeted, high-intent nudge, like an email or an SMS, specifically to the segment that's failing to activate, perhaps offering help or highlighting a key benefit they might have missed.
And measurement. How do they know if these quick fixes actually work?
Critically, they always use a holdout group, a small percentage of users who don't get the fixes. This ensures that any improvement seen is actually due to the changes made, and not just seasonality or some other external factor. You have to prove true activation lift, not just move a vanity metric around.
Right, the holdout is key. Okay, let's pivot to a different kind of crisis, a financial one. Your customer acquisition cost, Saki, is suddenly spiking, and relatedly, your payback period, the time it takes for a customer's revenue to cover their acquisition cost, is slipping longer and longer. This feels like a direct threat to the business model.
It is, and this scenario tests analytical depth and financial literacy. The expected first step is decomposition. You can't just say SOC is up. You have to break it down into its core components. Things like your cost metrics CPM or CPC from ad platforms, your engagement metrics click-through rates, CTR, your conversion rate CVR from click to sign up or sign up to paid, and then, crucially, connecting it to the downstream metrics. How well do users acquired from different sources actually activate, and what is their projected lifetime value, LTV? High CAC might be okay if LTV is also very high for that channel, but you need to know.
So break it all down by source and funnel stage. What's the immediate tactical action then?
The immediate action is usually pausing the clearly underperforming segments, campaigns, or ad creatives. You stop the bleeding first, then you reallocate that budget towards channels or segments that are still performing efficiently, while simultaneously starting tests on new hooks or audiences to replace the paused ones. It's about optimizing the portfolio based on payback period, not just top of funnel cost.
Got it. Stop the worst offenders, double down on winners, test replacements. Okay, final crisis scenario. The modern measurement nightmare. Attribution failure. Let's say iOS privacy changes or other factors make reliable user-level tracking impossible. How do you possibly measure the impact of your marketing channels when the old click-based attribution model just breaks?
Yeah, this is a huge one now. The expected approach is triangulation. Since perfect user-level data is often gone, you have to use multiple imperfect methods together to get a clearer picture.
Triangulation. Okay, what are the angles?
First, you absolutely must shift your instrumentation focus to robust first-party event tracking. That means getting really good with things like UTM parameters, ideally captured server-side so they're more reliable.
Okay, better first-party data capture. What else?
Since you can't track individuals reliably across platforms, you have to measure incrementality using macro-level tests. The key tools here are geo-holdouts or time-split tests.
Geo-holdouts. Could you just briefly explain how that works in this context?
Yeah.
Like, what does that actually look like?
Sure. A geo holdout means you might run a specific marketing campaign, say, a big push on Facebook ads only in certain geographic regions, maybe California and New York, and you deliberately don't run it in other similar regions like Texas and Florida, which act as your control group.
Oh, okay.
Then you measure the overall difference in your key metrics like signups or revenue between the test regions where the campaign ran and the control regions where it didn't. That difference gives you a much better estimate of the true incremental impact of that campaign, completely bypassing the need for flaky user-level click tracking.
That's clever. A bit like a big A/B test using geography instead of users.
Exactly. It measures the real lift. They also expect familiarity with lightweight media mix modeling, or MMM. This uses statistical analysis on aggregated historical data like weekly ad spend per channel and total weekly revenue to estimate the contribution of each channel.
Sounds complex.
It can be, but there are simpler approaches now. The point is using broader statistical methods when user-level tracking fails. And finally, don't forget the low-tech solution. Always be running simple on-site surveys asking, how did you hear about us? It helps capture insights into dark social channels or offline influence that tracking will always miss.
All right, let's shift gears to the reality for many growth roles, especially early stage. Operating lean. A growth hacker in a young startup is often, swimming upstream with almost zero budget. We need the scrappy playbook. If you can't just pour money into paid ads, what are the highest leverage channels they focus on?
Right, the near zero budget reality. The focus shifts dramatically towards channels with inherent leverage. Number one is product-led growth, PLG. That means focusing obsessively on improving activation, making the product self-serve, and building highly shareable moments within the product experience itself. Let the product drive acquisition.
Okay, PLG first. What else?
Outside the product, it's about being surgical, targeting niche communities where your ideal users already hang out, building strategic partnerships where you can tap into an existing audience. And then a big one is SEO, but a specific kind.
Specific, yeah.
Focusing heavily on creating zero volume and long tail content. These are search terms that might have very low search volume individually, but are highly specific to the user's problem or job to be done, JTBD. They signal strong intent.
Zero volume.
Yeah.
Like terms nobody searches for. Why target those?
Well, zero volume in keyword tools often just means low volume, maybe 10, 50 searches a month. But these terms are often uncompetitive, highly relevant, and when you aggregate hundreds of them, they can drive significant high-intent traffic over time. It's about finding underserved niches in search.
Okay, zooming in on that SEO philosophy a bit more. If your startup website has zero authority compared to established players, chasing those big competitive head terms feels like a losing battle. What's the specific content strategy for low authority sites?
Exactly. You don't chase the head terms initially. You prioritize bottom of the funnel content first, comparison pages, our tool versus competitor X, alternative pages, best alternative to Y tool. Also focus on those specific problem plus tool type queries.
Right.
The content itself should often be templated or easily generated programmatically as possible. Think creating libraries of templates users can download, or comprehensive comparison tables, or generating pages reviewing specific tools relevant to your audience's workflow. And technically, they emphasized ensuring really strong internal linking between these content pieces to help Google discover and index them faster, even with low external authority. The goal isn't flashy spikes. It's steady, low-pack acquisition that compounds over time.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Built from the bottom up with highly relevant, less competitive stuff.
Now, achieving this kind of velocity, especially with PLG and quick content wins, requires really tight collaboration with engineering and design. How do these growth leaders actually move fast without, as the source material often asks, breaking things? Yeah, that collaboration piece is key. It boils down to structured rituals and maintaining high trust. The most common mechanism mentioned was running a dedicated weekly growth stand-up or meeting.
A growth meeting. What makes it effective?
Keeping it focused, using concise experiment briefs that clearly state the hypothesis, metric, and plan. Having a crystal clear definition of done for every experiment shipped.
Definition of done. What does that typically include for growth?
It must include confirmation that tracking is implemented correctly, that QA has signed off, and crucially, that there's a documented rollback plan if things go wrong. No shortcuts on those.
Okay, clear briefs, clear DoD. But what about the inevitable trade-offs? Speed versus polish. Growth wants to ship fast. Design wants it perfect.
That tension is constant. The consensus approach described as strategic pragmatism. When that trade-off arises, the growth leader should propose shipping a scrappy V1 first, but running it behind a feature flag exposed only to a small percentage of users.
The feature flag again.
Yes. While that V1 is gathering initial data on whether the core idea even works, design and engineering can concurrently work on the polished V2. This de-risks the engineering investment.
But doesn't shipping even a scrappy V1 behind a flag risk damaging the user experience or the brand, even for that small percentage?
That's definitely the risk you manage. It's why the flag is essential. You limit the blast radius. The goal is to validate the value hypothesis quickly. Does this change actually move the needle? Before investing heavily in perfecting the execution. It prevents the team from spending weeks polishing something that ultimately provides no user value. It actually reduces wasted effort dramatically in the long run.
Got it. Validate value first, then polish. Okay, final piece. Communication. Growth generates a lot of data, runs lots of tests. How do effective leaders translate all that dense information into something digestible and actionable for different stakeholders, like founders versus the board versus other teams?
Communication has to be tailored. That came through strongly. For founders who are usually deep in the weeds with you, the communication style should be punchy. Keep it brief. What moved the needle this week? What are we testing next? What specific asks do you have for resources or decisions?
Punchy for founders. What about the board?
For the board, it needs to be higher level and directly tied to core business outcomes. Results must ladder up clearly to financial metrics, impact on revenue, LTV/CAC ratios, payback periods. They need to see how growth activities are driving shareholder value.
Makes sense. Financial focus for the board.
But the most critical piece of communication, really, regardless of the audience, was about active candor. That means aggressively avoiding vanity metrics. Don't just report the good news. And crucially, clearly communicate what initiatives you are actively stopping because the data showed they failed to prove incremental value. Showing you can kill ineffective projects builds huge credibility.
That's a great point. Stopping things is as important as starting them. Okay, let's wrap this section up. If someone is stepping into a new growth role, maybe at an early stage company, what's the blueprint for their first 90 days based on these expectations?
The sources actually outlined a pretty detailed 90-day plan structure that came up multiple times. Days 0 to 30 are all about instrumentation, audit, and quick wins. Get analytics set up correctly, define or refine the North Star and the KPI tree, run a user friction audit to find low-hanging fruit, and aim to ship maybe 2 immediate activation quick wins to build momentum.
Okay, 0-30. Set up, audit, quick wins. What about the next month?
Days 31 to 60 shift towards building the engine and validating channels. Establish that rice-scored experiment backlog we talked about. Launch core lifecycle marketing journeys like onboarding emails. And focus on validating 1 or 2 potentially scalable acquisition channels with small tests.
31-60. Build backlog, launch lifecycle, validate channels, and the final month.
Days 61 to 90 are about stabilization and planning. Codify the learnings from the first 2 months into an internal growth playbook. Create the permanent growth dashboard that everyone can reference. And then, based on everything learned, propose a structured, data-backed quarterly roadmap for growth initiatives going forward. You move from reactive fixes to proactive strategy.
So, bringing this all together, what does it really mean? We've journeyed through defining strategy, the rigor of execution, handling crises, operating lean. It feels like the role of the modern growth hacker is definitely matured.
Significantly, yeah. They're clearly not expected to be these lone wolf optimizers just running random A/B tests anymore.
Right. It's more like they're disciplined system designers. Everything seems anchored back to that clear North Star metric, applying real statistical rigor and constantly pushing away from subjective opinion towards, quantifiable evidence.
Exactly. And that systemic approach, it demands continuous learning. And maybe just as importantly, resilience. Because these leaders, they know that not everything is going to work. In fact, it was interesting that these interview documents also specifically asked about growth initiatives that had failed.
Asking about failures. That tells you something right there.
Yeah.
The lesson learned from failure is often the most valuable data point you can get, isn't it?
Absolutely. There was a great example cited involving a paywall test. They launched it, but admitted they launched it too soon because they fell victim to peaking at the early results.
Peaking again.
Yeah. It introduced novelty bias, made the results look better than they were long-term, and it actually resulted in a slight but measurable decline in overall LTV once the novelty wore off.
Ouch. So what was the key takeaway there?
Well, it wasn't just about fixing that specific paywall test. The real learning was fixing the process that allowed the peaking to happen. They used that failure to institute mandatory fixed test windows for all future experiments, especially pricing ones. And they added a requirement for proper LTV modeled analysis before calling any pricing test a winner. They used the failure to build new, rigorous guardrails into their system.
That's powerful. Using failure not just as a lesson, but as a trigger to systematically improve the process itself.
Exactly. And that leads perfectly into our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider.
Okay, let's hear it.
How often do you really audit your own failures? And I don't just mean identifying what went wrong in the final result. I mean meticulously auditing why it went wrong in your process. Why did you peak? Why was the sample size wrong? Why wasn't tracking validated? And then, crucially, do you use that process audit to create fixed, explicit, rigorous guardrails for your future work? Because that discipline, that systematic learning from process failure, that seems to be what truly separates the merely busy experimenter from the genuinely strategic compounding builder.